Welcome to the next episode in a Legendarium series about England's legendary kings. Today we'll be talking about Oswald of Northumbria. During the presentation, we'll be talking about what happened when the Romans left Britain, the Anglian migration to North England, the kingdoms of Deira and Bernicia, King Oswald's rise to power, and finally King Oswald's martyrdom and canonization. For almost 400 years, Britain was part of the Roman Empire. During Roman rule, they built roads, towns, forts, and temples. They established a huge legionary fortress at what would become the city of York and built Hadrian's Wall to keep out raiders from the north. In addition, they brought Christianity to England, with the Emperor Constantine crowned in the great fortress at York. While Christianity was strongest among the urban elite, the Brythonic-speaking population not only worshipped the traditional Celtic gods, but mystery religions imported from across the Roman Empire. However, as the frontiers of the empire faced ever greater pressure, the legions based at York left to defend Roman Gaul. Emperor Honorius told the Britons to look to your own defenses, and they would have to look well. During the last couple of generations of Roman rule, Romano-Britons faced a new problem, not just raids from the Picts and the Scots in the north, but from Germanic tribes who came across the sea in keelboats. These Germanic raiders included the Angles from what is today Schleswig-Holstein and the Saxons from North Germany. During the final years of Roman rule, the legions even had to build watchtowers along the coast to defend against the Germanic seafarers, and soon it would be just the Romano-Britons manning those towers. With Roman rule effectively over, Romano-Britons began to employ some Anglo-Saxons as mercenaries against the Picts and the Scots. With gold and silver in short supply, the Romano-Britons paid their Germanic fighters in land. Effectively, they became Roman foederati, or troops paid in land who settled in the far-flung regions they defended. However, if you saw the episode about Vortigern and Hengist, you will know that these mercenaries could easily turn against their paymasters and hosts after seeing how militarily weak they were. When the Angles began pouring into the north of England in AD 450, their cousin tribes, the Saxons and Jutes, had already carved out small kingdoms along the southern and southeastern coast of England. The Angles conquered and colonized land first in the Yorkshire Wolds, north of the Humber River, calling their new homeland Deira. As Rome collapsed, the Angles pressed north and settled in the lowland river valleys of England's east coast. While this was indeed an age of war and upheaval, the conquest was not done solely by the sword. Romano-Britons who traded with the new Germanic kingdoms when peace broke out, intermarriage became common between the Romano-Britons and the various Germanic nations. We even have evidence that the two sides tried to learn each other's languages. And of course, this period also gave us the legend of King Arthur, historically said to be a Romano-Briton who defeated the Saxons at Baden Hill sometime at the end of the 400s and later died fighting at Hadrian's Wall. While Romantic writers would create grandiose and often anachronistic legends about King Arthur, it would be erroneous to focus on a single shadowy figure when there is much else to learn from this time. However, the kingdom of Deira faced a new problem, namely a rival Anglian kingdom called Bernicia, which emerged a century later. In the year AD 547, the ancient British coastal stronghold of Bamberg was captured by an Anglian chief called Ida the Flamebearer, a petty king who already ruled an expansive realm north of the Humber River. After his victory, Ida expanded his new kingdom of Bernicia by adding new territory south of the River Tees. Indeed, life for these peasants in the contested border regions was often especially harsh, as they could be taxed twice by men of the two warring kings who claimed their land. Once King Ida consolidated his rule and drove out the rival monarchs, one can only imagine that it brought relief to those who had to do all the chores and pay the taxes. However, Ida the Flamebearer and his heirs continued to face plenty of enemies. Of course, the most important one was the rival Anglian kingdom of Deira. The kingdom of Deira extended roughly from the Humber River in the north to the Tees River, while Bernicia stretched from the Tees River to the Firth of Forth. And on top of that, there were restless Picts and Scots to the north, along with the kingdom of Mercia to the south. War raged in the north for a generation without resolution. While kings might rise to glory through winning victories, success often brings jealousy, and their rivals would band together or attack from the side to crush a victorious kingdom, then begin squabbling among themselves for the spoils of war. And this lamentable situation continued for years, until King Aethelfrith of Bernicia made himself king of both Deira and Bernicia, creating what would become the Kingdom of Northumbria, a name that comes from north of the river Humber. He won a series of crushing victories over Celtic and Germanic rivals. However, his fearsome paganism was a source of dismay to English Christians. Indeed, according to one legend of the time, he learned that a group of 100 monks prayed for his defeat in battle, and to take his revenge he ordered all 100 monks to be beheaded. Aethelfrith had 7 children, and we know very little about them except for Eanfrith, Oswy, and Oswald, who was born in the year 604 AD. When Oswald was only 12 years old, King Aethelfrith suddenly came down with a slight case of death, which proved a terrible setback to his political career. With Oswald too young to take the throne, Oswald's uncle Edwin seized the crown by force. Oswald and his younger brother Oswy eventually took refuge in Iona Monastery in the Hebrides, part of the Kingdom of Dalriada, which covered much of western Scotland and part of Ireland. There he and his siblings converted to Christianity and grew up under the tutelage of the Iona monks. However, Oswald saw his chance again when his uncle Edwin was killed while fighting against the fearsome King Penda, the fearsome pagan king of Mercia. With the king dead, Deira and Bernicia split up again, and if you saw the episode about Penda the Pagan, you know he was an object of terrible fear among British Christians, as his crushing victories seemed to show that his pagan god Woden was greater than the Christian god. And that might be one of the reasons why the Scots and the Picts chose to provide Oswald with the troops needed to press his claim to the throne of Northumbria. Oswald hurried south and was proclaimed king of a shrunken Northumbrian kingdom by his father's former supporters. However, like many kings of his age, he had to fight to keep his throne. King Cadwallon of Wales, an ally of Penda the Pagan, hurried north to install his own man on the Northumbrian throne. Though outnumbered 2-1, Oswald built a wooden cross taller than a man with his own hands. He prayed before it the night before combat, and the Venerable Bede wrote that Saint Columba appeared before him, promising victory. During the battle, Oswald fought in the shadow of this cross against his rivals, and when he won the battle, he credited his victory to God and became the king of a shrunken Northumbria. Now, Oswald embraced Christianity in a way that the other Germanic kings of England had not. Most of the Germanic kings were baptized and took communion to reach heaven, but then continued to pray to pagan gods for victory. Even Oswald's father died an unapologetic pagan. Now, Oswald's fervor may have come about in part because he remembered the Ionian monks who gave him refuge. Indeed, Oswald invited a missionary named Saint Aidan from Iona, where he had lived for almost 20 years. Aidan led a group of Irish monks to found a monastery and missionary bishopric for Northumbria called Lindisfarne, and history buffs will remember this as the site of the first great Viking raid some 160 years down the road. As king, Oswald was praised for his generosity to the poor. According to tale-tellers of the time, a group of poor beggars once appeared before Oswald at his palace asking for food, and Oswald not only gave them the food on his silver platter, but the silver platter itself, with instructions to sell it and divide the money equally among themselves. One of the beggars cried out in gratitude and grabbed the king's hand. He said, "May this hand never perish." Indeed, King Oswald's hand would be preserved as a relic in Bamberg Church. However, Oswald would not fare as well against his old enemy, Penda the Pagan. After only 8 years on the throne and at the age of 38, King Oswald met Penda the Pagan at Shropshire. Now, while King Penda the Pagan murdered Oswald, the site where he died was said to gain healing powers. According to tale-tellers of the time, a horseman rode near the place where Oswald had been murdered by Penda the Pagan, when he was suddenly thrown from his horse, and the mount rolled around on the ground in agony. However, the horse happened to roll across the spot where Oswald died and was immediately cured of his fit. When the rider stopped at a nearby inn, much astonished, and told the locals his tale, the local people realized that the rider had been on the spot where Oswald died. So they took a paralyzed girl to the same place, and she was cured too. People began to take earth from the spot where King Oswald died to put it in water for the sick to drink, and so much earth was removed that it left a pit large enough for a man to stand in. Though Penda killed Oswald, he could not kill the advance of Christianity. Indeed, Oswald's brother Oswy would confront Penda the pagan again in the year AD 655 with an army of fervent crusaders eager to avenge the death of their saint king. Oswy would indeed avenge his brother, kill Penda, and unite Northumbria under Christianity. Oswald's example and martyrdom fed fuel to a Christian fire, which spread the Gospels throughout Northumbria and eventually the whole of the north of England. For centuries afterward, King Oswald served as a role model for Christian kingship. Indeed, in the centuries to come, his relics would be sought after by monasteries, with kings vying to possess one of the Saint King's relics. And this heroic example of martyrdom, of a Christian king dying at the hands of pagans, would become a truly necessary beacon of hope during the Viking invasions a couple of hundred years later. Thanks again for joining me in this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, please let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.